The long train came to a slow stop in the small Texas town, releasing a hiss of steam that wrapped around the wooden station like a ghost. The wind carried the smell of dust, iron, and faraway rain. When the doors opened, a young woman stepped down holding a worn suitcase close to her chest. Her name was Clara Mayfield. Her brown hair was pulled back neatly and her dress, though old, had been washed and pressed with care. She looked around nervously, expecting someone to be waiting for her. Clara had traveled for 5 days from Missouri. She had sold almost everything she owned to pay for the ticket. The letter in her pocket had given her hope through every mile. It was written by James Dalton, a Texas rancher who had placed an advertisement for a mail-order bride. In his letters he had written kindly, not about riches or beauty, but about wanting someone who would share his days and help him build a home. Clara had lost her parents young and had been living as a housemaid, dreaming of something more than cold rooms and harsh orders. His words had felt warm, almost safe, so she had said yes, packed her few belongings, and come to Texas to meet the man who promised her a life of peace. The platform was almost empty now, and her smile began to fade. She stood there with her heart beating fast, scanning faces, waiting for someone to call her name. But no one did. Finally, a man with a sheriff's badge came walking up. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking softly. "Ma'am, are you Clara Mayfield?" "Yes," she said quickly, her voice small. "I'm here to meet James Dalton. He said he'd be here to meet the morning train." The sheriff removed his hat, holding it against his chest. His voice turned low, careful. "Ma'am, there's been an accident. James Dalton passed yesterday. His horse got spooked on the trail. It threw him and he didn't make it." For a few seconds, Clara couldn't move. Her ears rang. The words didn't seem real. Then she dropped her suitcase and the sound echoed across the quiet platform. Her lips trembled, but no words came. She had traveled hundreds of miles, left everything behind, and now there was no one waiting for her. The sheriff gently helped her sit on a bench. He said he was sorry, that everyone in town was shocked. Clara just stared at the letter in her hands, the ink smudged from her tears. "I'll be waiting at the station," it said. But now he never would. The sheriff guided her to a small boarding house in town, run by a kind older woman named Mrs. Turner. She gave Clara a room for the night, saying she could stay as long as she needed. Clara sat by the window for hours watching the sky darken. She didn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the station again, the empty platform, the sheriff's sad face. The next morning, the church bells rang softly. The funeral for James Dalton was being held at the small white chapel near the hill. Clara dressed quietly, her hands shaking as she brushed her hair. She didn't know anyone there, but something inside told her she needed to go. She walked through the dusty road until she saw the church surrounded by wagons and horses. People were gathered outside, whispering and comforting each other. She stayed back at first, afraid to intrude. Then she saw a simple wooden coffin at the front covered with wildflowers. The sight of it made her knees weak. She had never met him, but somehow it felt like she had lost something important. She listened as the preacher spoke about a good man, honest and kind, who helped others without asking for anything in return. Clara's eyes filled with tears. That was the man she had written to, the man she thought she'd marry. When the service ended, people began to leave. Some noticed her standing there alone and looked at her with quiet curiosity. One tall man standing near the gate kept watching her. His name was Luke Harper, James's neighbor and closest friend. He had known James for years, had worked beside him through droughts and storms. When he heard that the bride had arrived too late, his heart had a strange ache he couldn't explain. He walked toward her slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel. She looked up, startled, wiping her tears quickly. "You must be Clara," he said in a deep, gentle voice. She nodded. "Yes, I came to marry James. I didn't know." Her voice broke and she turned her face away. Luke took off his hat, his blue eyes full of quiet sadness. "I'm sorry, ma'am. He was a good man. He talked about you, you know. He was real happy about your letters." That made her cry again, softly. Luke hesitated, not sure what to say, then added, "If you don't have anywhere to stay, you can come by my ranch. Just till you figure things out. It's the least I can do." Clara looked at him, unsure, but something in his face looked honest, like he meant every word. She thanked him, and that afternoon he brought his wagon around to take her there. The road to his ranch was quiet, stretching through wide-open fields. The sun began to set, painting everything in gold. Clara sat silently beside him, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't know what the future held anymore, but the wind on her face felt oddly calming. When they reached the ranch, Luke helped her down. The place was modest but well kept, a wooden house with a porch, a small barn, and horses grazing nearby. The air smelled of hay and coffee. Inside it was clean and simple. There were a few books on a shelf, a blanket neatly folded on the chair, and the sound of the wind humming through the window cracks. Luke made coffee while she sat quietly at the table. "You can stay here for a while," he said. "I've got a spare room. My nephew's at school during the week. You won't be in the way." She tried to smile. "Thank you, Mr. Harper." He shook his head. "Just Luke." Over the next few days, Clara helped with chores to repay his kindness. She cooked meals, swept the porch, and fed the chickens. Luke didn't talk much, but when he did, his words carried warmth. Sometimes he caught her humming softly as she worked, and it made something stir in his chest. One afternoon, his young nephew Tom came running in from the fields, excited to meet her. He was a cheerful boy, missing a front tooth, and he quickly grew attached to Clara. He asked her to tell stories at night and showed her his drawings. She laughed for the first time in weeks, and Luke noticed. The evenings became gentle moments. They would sit by the fire, Luke reading from an old book while Clara mended a shirt. Sometimes silence filled the room, but it never felt empty. It was the kind of silence that held peace, not sorrow. Still, Clara felt guilt at times. She often looked at the letter James had written, the one she had carried all the way from Missouri. Sometimes she whispered, "I wish I could have met you." One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the sky with orange and red, she stood by the porch, lost in thought. Luke came beside her, leaning against the rail. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "I keep thinking I came too late. Maybe it was all for nothing." Luke looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "Maybe you were late for him, but maybe right on time for someone else." She turned to him, surprised, but before she could answer, he tipped his hat and went back inside. His words stayed with her long after the night fell. For the first time since she arrived, Clara didn't cry when she went to bed. The sound of the wind through the open window felt softer, almost like it was carrying a promise. She didn't understand what kind of future awaited her, but deep down, something told her she wasn't meant to leave yet. And in that quiet Texas night, she finally fell asleep, peaceful for the first time in a long while. While outside, Luke sat on the porch under the stars, thinking that sometimes fate just runs a day behind but never too late. The days passed slowly at the ranch, each one folding into the next like the pages of a quiet, steady book. Clara found herself settling into the rhythms of life there. She would wake with the sun, her feet touching the cool wooden floor as she prepared breakfast for Luke and his nephew. Tom, the boy who had quickly grown fond of her, often came running into the kitchen with a grin, dragging stories from the fields or small drawings he had made. Clara would laugh and help him with his letters and numbers, feeling a warmth that she hadn't known in years. Luke noticed every small change in her, though he rarely said anything. He watched her move with calm confidence, how she handled the chores, how she spoke softly to the animals, and how she always made time for the boy. He had lived alone for years after James died, thinking no one could fill that emptiness. But Clara brought a light that made even the long, dusty afternoons seem alive. Sometimes, Clara would find herself staring out over the open fields, the horizon stretching endlessly, and wonder if fate had really brought her here. She had come to marry someone she had never met, but now she felt a sense of belonging she hadn't expected. She didn't yet understand what Luke's words meant the first night she arrived, that she was right on time, but slowly, she began to feel the truth in them. One afternoon, while sweeping the porch, Clara noticed Luke repairing a fence with careful precision. He looked up and caught her gaze, giving a small nod. She smiled and returned to her work, but her heart raced a little. There was something steady about him, something reliable, and she felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. The evenings were the quietest time on the ranch. After the chores were done and the animals fed, Clara would sit on the porch, mending clothes or reading a book she had found on a shelf. Luke would join her at times, sitting beside her silently as the sun dipped below the horizon. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was filled with comfort. Clara noticed the way Luke would glance at her when he thought she wasn't looking, how he always made sure she had enough to eat. how he quietly took care of every detail of the ranch so that she could feel at ease. Tom loved these evenings too. He would bring his drawings and ask Clara to tell stories. She would make up tales of brave women and clever children, of distant lands and simple acts of kindness. Luke would listen quietly, smiling faintly, sometimes joining in with a line or two, and Clara realized that her presence had brought life to the old ranch in ways she had never imagined. One day, Luke returned from town carrying a small package. Clara opened it to find a ribbon and a tiny jar of honey. "For you," he said simply, his voice steady. "Nothing fancy, just thought you might like it." Clara felt a warmth spread in her chest. She thanked him softly, but the words didn't feel enough. She didn't know how to explain the strange fluttering she felt whenever he looked at her. The following weeks continued like this. Clara became part of the household, but she still carried a quiet ache for the man she had come to marry. Some nights she would stare at James's letter, tracing the ink with her fingers, thinking of the life that might have been. Luke noticed her occasional sadness, though he never pressed her to speak of it. He understood loss, he understood waiting, and he understood the quiet ache of hearts not yet healed. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in deep oranges and purples, Clara sat on the porch sewing a patch on Tom's shirt. Luke joined her, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He handed her one without a word, and they drank in silence. The boy had gone to bed hours earlier, leaving them alone with the whisper of the wind through the trees. Finally, Clara spoke. "Do you ever think about what might have been?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Luke leaned back in his chair, looking out over the fields. "Sometimes," he said, "but I've learned that what's meant for us comes, even if it takes a little longer than we expect." She looked at him, curiosity and uncertainty in her eyes. "What do you mean?" He turned to her, his blue eyes steady. "You weren't late, Clara. You were just right on time for me. I didn't know it then, but the ranch, the boy, me, we needed someone like you, someone kind, brave, and patient. I just didn't realize it until you arrived." Clara felt her heart skip. His words were strange but comforting, filling the empty spaces inside her chest. She didn't know how to respond, so she just nodded, looking down at her sewing. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between them grew. Luke trusted her with the house, the boy, and his heart in ways he hadn't trusted anyone before. Clara trusted him with her past, her pain, and her hopes. She felt safe, cared for, and slowly she began to let herself dream of a future again. One morning, Luke asked her to join him in the barn. He had a surprise. Inside, he showed her a small garden he had been preparing for her. Flowers planted in neat rows, herbs and vegetables ready for tending. "Thought you might like to plant something," he said, smiling faintly. Clara's eyes filled with tears. "It's beautiful," she whispered. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Luke replied softly. "Just take your time. Stay as long as you like." Days later, a neighbor stopped by with news from the town. They mentioned Clara's arrival, the tragic accident, and how she had stayed at the Harper Ranch. Clara felt a flush of embarrassment, but Luke only shook his head. "Don't worry about what they think. This is your home now if you want it to be." One quiet night, as the wind rustled through the trees, Luke took her hand gently. "Clara, I need to tell you something," he said. "I've been alone here for a long time. James was my friend, but I think he would want you to be safe, to be happy, and I want to be the one who gives you that happiness if you'll let me." Tears sprang to her eyes. She had been afraid to let herself feel anything beyond grief, but now her heart stirred in a new way. "Luke, she started, but the words failed her. He squeezed her hand gently. "You don't have to say it now. Just know, I mean what I say. You are not late, Clara. You are exactly where you need to be." The months passed, and the small ranch became a home in the truest sense. The laughter of the boy, the quiet care between Clara and Luke, and the simple rhythm of chores and meals filled every corner with life. Clara realized she had found something she hadn't known she was searching for, a place where she belonged, where love could grow naturally without pressure or pretense. One spring morning, Luke rode into town early and returned with a small box. He handed it to her carefully. Inside was a simple silver ring. His eyes were gentle, hopeful. "I know this isn't how you imagine things, Clara," he said, "but I can give you honesty, work, and a heart that will never leave you." Clara's hands shook as she took the ring. "Luke," she whispered, tears falling freely. You were never late, he said softly. You just took the road that led you here, to me. She smiled through her tears, feeling a peace she hadn't known in years. She placed the ring on her finger and nodded. Yes, she said, quietly but firmly. Yes, I'll stay. The townsfolk noticed the change too. What had started as whispers about a bride who came too late turned into admiration for the woman who had brought life and warmth back to the Harper Ranch. They watched as Clara and Luke worked side by side, laughed with Tom, and built a home together, and under the wide Texas sky, with the wind carrying the scent of flowers and freshly tilled soil, Clara finally understood. Life didn't always go as planned. Sometimes you arrive a day too late, and sometimes that day is exactly what it takes for your heart to find the place where it truly belongs.